the endgame has always been one of the most important parts of the game in chess. And one of the reasons for that is because whatever plan or attack we're leading, at some point there could be a situation in which the queens basically exchange. As soon as the queen exchange, we get into a type of position where most of the tactics are no longer available, and we need a different kind of plan, a different type of strategy in order to continue from that position. Therefore, I'd like to give you some valuable concepts and important suggestions about how you can handle endgames and ultimately how you can improve your strategy whenever the queens disappear in your games. We're going to go over an actual excerpt of a game that was played by the great world champion Alexander Alekhine. He was actually the 4th world champion, and his opponent in this game, playing with white, was grandmaster named Znosko-Borovsky, Eugene Znosko-Borovsky. Alekhine played with black, and the game was played in Paris in 1933. So let's take a look. It was white to move. Basically what we see on the board is a typical endgame position. There are no weaknesses, or at least not major weaknesses, neither for white nor for black. And we get to see that essentially the queens are off the board, which actually determines that we have an endgame position. White's first move in this position was bishop h6. That was a quite logical decision. It attacks the rook and sets white's bishop on a very active position at h6. So black has to decide and where to retreat the rook, and essentially how to start a plan later. Now, before we go on with how the game continued, I'd like to tell you that first and foremost in endgames, you should slow down. And what I mean by slowing down is not like slow down on your moves and think a little more. That's obviously something that isn't determined actually by the endgame, but is determined by the time you have on your clock. What I mean by slowing down is that all these tactical possibilities and complications and trying to advance faster than your opponent, they don't work in the endgame. See, the endgame is about being patient and making sure that you add all these little adjustments to your position, all these little improvements that ultimately make a difference. So we have pretty much a very quiet game, and it's all about improvement. So after the move of bishop h6, black had the idea to make sure that every single piece improves, and therefore his next move was ultimately rook f to d8. Now, if you were wondering why didn't white start with rook d7, trying to improve his rook and attack black on e7 and c7, he didn't do it because that rook would have been alone, and black would just do rook d8. Whether white will take c7 or e7, that will either way lead to a checkmate, so white will actually have to exchange there, and after the recapture, white has just spent a tempo to move it to d7 and then exchange. So it didn't make much sense. He played bishop h6 therefore, and then rook f to d8. The next move by white was an actual mistake. He played king f1. And I know that now you wonder, how could this move be a mistake? I mean, white's improving his king and bringing it towards the center. One of the best things in the endgame is that we have the time. As I mentioned earlier, it's all about improvement. So we have the time to get every single one of our pieces, especially the king, which is very essential in the endgame. And we could centralize them, we can make them better. The king, while in the opening and middle game needs to stay safe, in the endgame can actually turn into a very valuable piece, and that's exactly what white wants to do with king f1. So what's the best plan for black? Well, the reason why this move is a mistake is because black finds a way to expand this position. Now remember this, endgame isn't just about improving the pieces, it's about expanding your position. What I mean by expanding your position means that you have to find a way to gain more space, to get better control, and simply take advantage because of the better connection of your pieces. The excellent way on how black responded to king f1 was f5. And now we realize that not only the black is opening a free route for his king so that he can centralize without any fear that it will be attacked or something. As I mentioned, when the queens are off the board, the king is pretty safe. But also, with the f and e pawns, he's able to gain a lot of space. Generally, you have to be very careful when you advance the pawns in the endgame because they could turn into weaknesses. However, when you believe that the pawns will be safe or your opponent just doesn't have any way to attack against them, then you could naturally push them and believe that this will help you to expand your position. After f5, white exchanged on d8, black recaptures with the rook, and then we realize that white actually has to play g3, which doesn't seem to be making any weaknesses, and yet doesn't help white as much as the move of king f7 helps black. After king f7, black continues improving. After that, white played bishop e3, having to move that bishop away because otherwise it would be attacked. And now black just played h5. Yeah, that was a little bit of a pawn weakness, so black definitely wants to advance it and possibly even get to exchange it, opening a new file for activity of his rook. He already has one file, but it just doesn't seem like he can really move into that. So black simply pushes the pawn, getting ready to exchange it and open a new line for the rook. So after h5, white played king to e2, and then black plays king e6. That's how we're supposed to think about the endgame. At least for the start of the endgame, we have to think about improving our pieces, centralizing the king, and above all, gaining more space, expanding our position through some good pawn moves. The pawn structure definitely guarantees black a great piece activity. And now white plays the move of rook to d1. So what would you do in this position? You can pause the video and try to think for a moment. If you have black, would you actually like to exchange the rooks and force the white king to move down? Or would you rather like to move it somewhere to f8 or g8 where it will, well, it won't have an open line for difference than white, but maybe it will stay on the board? What do you think about this? Now I've supposed that the exchange on d1 looks good. The problem is that if you exchange too many pieces in the endgame, except if you're not material up or you have some huge advantage like a great pawn weakness or something bad that you can attack against, it will be very difficult to win. And that's exactly why rook takes d1 doesn't work. Because when white recaptures, even if we get to advance our king, he'll play f3. And it looks very difficult to try and strengthen this position from that moment. So black decided, I need that rook. Remember that. When you think about exchanging pieces, especially in the endgame, you have to make sure that you look at the prospects of those pieces. This means they may be equal right now, and so it may seem like you would really like to exchange it. But if you think about their prospects and what they can do if they don't exchange, that will give you a clear idea on whether you really need to exchange or you can actually do something better. And so black decided that trading wouldn't help him. But if he moves the rook down to g8 in this position, not only that white's rook will have no job on that file and it can't penetrate to d7, d5 or any other square. Of course black can also block them. But on its own, the rook from the g8 will have the possibility to attack eventually on the g file, probably with moves of h3 to h4 to h6 g3 or bishop d6 and even f4. So given that the rook on g8 will have that value, that pressure against white's pawn structure, and potentially the way to step onto the g2 later on, definitely it matters a lot more than white. So black doesn't want to exchange it. That's how you have to think. If you're up to exchange, ask yourself, what are the prospects of those pieces? Do I really want to trade it? If the answer is, okay, I definitely have a better prospect for that rook in the next few moves, then you don't want to do that. You want to exchange your worst pieces, not the better ones. And therefore black played rook to g8. Once the rook moved down, of course white played f3. Now, he didn't need to do it. He could have played something else, like for example b3 or whatever. But I guess he wanted to do something. If white played for something like b3, black would have played h4, and now we see that next move, probably he will trade h6 to the g, and then there is bishop d6 as I mentioned. So there are plenty of ways on how black can improve his position, including f4 or even rook h8. So we get to see that white wanted to do something, and he made something bad. He played f3. I have to say that f3 only worsens the position. Why? Because pawns don't go backward, and except if the pawn move you're making is very valuable at improving your position, try to stay away from it. The move of h5 definitely helped black to prepare, but the move of f3 only weakened the support of g3. So after the move of pawn to f3, which weakened the g3, black plays h4. It is incredibly important that in endgames you specify which area you'll choose. Don't just improve generally. I mean, you can do that for a start, but you have to really pick a target or an area of the board where you're going to go. You may not be able to attack quickly out there. As I mentioned, in endgames things go a little bit slower. However, if you choose a specific side of the board, like black chose the king side, similar to the middle game, you may be able to have a very purposeful strategy, and you will know where to expand and where to focus on extending your position. So after h4, bishop f2, h takes g3, h takes with g3, and rook h8, we see that now white will have to hold that pawn with a bishop. Like one very important piece will stay as a defender in most times, while black can just keep improving his pieces, and even the bishop gets into the play. King f1, rook g8. Let's force the bishop to stay there. And that's the power of the weaknesses. In fact, when you create a weakness against your opponent, you don't need to win it. No, actually, in most times you have a very easy way to protect it. But in some way, that's what you want. You want to force your opponent to defend on that weakness, because when he does it, then you have forced some of his valuable pieces to stay passive and defending, instead of letting him use them for some sort of counterattack against you. And so black chose now to continue expanding on the other side. This is another interesting strategy in the endgame, and it's called the second weakness principle. The plan is that when you have one weakness and your opponent has done a good defense on that, he's already passive. So if you find a way to open a second area, you have a hard time defending both, simply because he can't stretch his pieces too easily. And that's exactly what black knows. He plays a5, and then he plays a4, and then after that, in case of rook to d2, black plays a takes to b3, a takes to b3, and then rook to a8, taking another open line on the side. If white didn't play rook d2, but he did b4, then it would have been even easier, because first of all, black would make a3, pawn that's very fast and very far to queening, and later on we see plenty of ways on how we can attack b4, and attack c3 and reach out for c2. It's very dangerous. So white tried rook d2, the exchange, and recaptures to stabilize, but the only thing he's doing is that he's becoming even more passive. So after rook a8, c4, white's trying to exchange more pawns, which is his choice. I mean, if he can exchange some of the black active pieces and the pawn, perhaps black will lose a little bit of that pressure. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. In a few of the next moves, white is forced to defend the pawn on b3 with his rook, and the pawn on c5 with the bishop. It looks awful. After the move of pawn to b4, g4 by white, and f4 by black, we get to realize that after a few of the next moves, white's position becomes extremely bad and very difficult to play. So after rook to c1, rook a2, and rook c3, there's just no way on how white can defend everything. b3 is being attacked, c5 is being pressured, and f3 is being targeted just as well. After white played rook to a7 at this point, then we see that black just needs to make a little bit of a defending move, and after rook b7 and rook takes b3, the pawn falls. So black was able to get his position so far by just doing one thing: improving his piece and following a good plan on the king side. After the pressure was already done, he attacked on the queen side by creating another weakness, and it was a beautiful strategy that helped him to get a winning position. A few of the next moves help black to get a pass pawn, and that's something important about endgames. Remember that besides piece activity and a good plan, you also need to make sure that you have a pass pawn, because when you have a pass pawn, this means a pawn that cannot be stopped by any of the opponent's pawns. That pass pawn is going to go far and move up quickly, and it's going to take one of your opponent's pieces away. Maybe literally, or just to force one of his pieces to just stay back there, defend, and do nothing. Having a pass pawn in the endgame is tremendous. So whenever you have a position like this, think about making a pass pawn. Black definitely got one. So now he keeps on improving by bringing his king up, and definitely the idea is to make another pass pawn with the move of e4. F takes to e4 and king takes e4. Now black's got two pass pawns, a far advanced king, in a very powerful position, which he is easily being able to transform into a winning one. Rook takes e7, rook takes f2 check, the white king moves, but then black plays b2, and as a result of rook to c, rook to b7, black plays rook to c2. So the idea is that there is just no way on how white can practically stop how the two pawns are moving together. With his active rook and the powerful two pawns, black is just advancing further. Rook takes to c7 follows, because if white recaptures b1 queen is a winning move, and when white takes back to b2, f2 is the killer. If white's king goes up, we have rook to e8 check, e7 I mean, and rook e1 with a checkmate. So it was beautiful, and I really wanted to say that this is one of the most impressive equal endgames that I've seen in my life. Essentially, one of the most interesting parts of this endgame is how black didn't do anything special in order to get to an advantageous position. All that he did was to generally improve his pieces by taking those onto some valuable open lines and expand by bringing his pawns further, and at the same time making sure that they won't be attacked. After he managed to expand this position in this way and played h5 and moves like king e6, the other thing that was really beautiful is that he didn't want to exchange. Keep your valuable pieces. Most of all, consider their prospects. Another brilliant idea was how he was actually able to attack on the king side. So this shows us how we have to figure an area of the board where we can pressure him. You don't need to win anything there, just create the pressure in order to tie your opponent's pieces down on defense. That's how you restrict them. After which, you can basically find a way to make a new weakness. Don't hurry. Do it all in a slow way. When you go on and play slowly, first of all, you're going to keep your good position, and you'll give your opponent the time to make more mistakes. And of course, this way, you'll also be able to figure out any counterplay he may try for, and eventually you can stop it. It was beautiful how black was able to open on the queen side and actually create a new weakness which tied down the white rook. Further on, with that blockade, black was able to go on and eventually create a pass pawn. So in a few moves, that pass pawn transformed into a dangerous nail into white's position, strong pawn wedge. So he was able to make a second pass pawn, and the endgame was winning. I think this is a very good practical endgame which introduces some of the most valuable concepts that you have to keep in mind when playing endgames. You can remember that endgame is a very difficult stage of the game. It's much more different than the middle game or the opening, because in the end game you must think with plans. You must think about schemes and where to go on, like how to improve the pieces, how to do things slowly. So you don't have these concrete combinations or tactics that we look in the middle game. Yet it's really fun to play the end game if you know what to look for, and something that many chess players, especially your opponents, may not be aware of how to do, so that you can outplay them in an easy way. So thank you, and I hope that you enjoyed my suggestions on how you can play and improve your endgame strategy.